I am Aaron, 32 years old, and work as a software developer in Seattle. Every Sunday I drive to my parents' suburban home for our weekly family dinner tradition. You would think after 3 decades they would respect my boundaries, but my folks have always been the type to make decisions for their children without asking. Last week, as we gathered around the dining table, I felt that familiar mix of dread and amusement when they started discussing plans for my sister. Before I tell you how this dinner turned into a complete disaster, let me know where you are watching from and hit that like and subscribe button while I explain how I finally stood up for myself. Family dynamics can be complicated, and mine certainly fits that description. Growing up, my parents were always the decision makers. They chose which sports I played, which classes I took, and even which friends they thought were appropriate. My mother, Catherine, is a kind-hearted woman with good intentions, but she believes she always knows what is best for her children. My father, Thomas, backs her up without question, creating this united front that was impossible to break through as a child. My younger sister, Brianna, is 22 and recently graduated from college with a degree in communications. Unlike me, she never really fought against our parents' controlling nature. She embraced it, allowing them to guide her every move from choosing her college to approving her roommates. This created a dependence that continued well into her adulthood. While I pushed for independence, Brianna settled comfortably into having decisions made for her. Over the years, my parents established a pattern of making assumptions without consulting me. When I was 25, they volunteered me to help Uncle Frank move across town without asking if I was available. When I was 28, they told their friends I would design their website for free. Last year, they informed me I would be hosting Thanksgiving because my apartment was supposedly the largest among family members despite never having measured anyone else's place. These incidents might seem small individually, but collectively they represented a frustrating pattern of disregard for my autonomy. Each time I reluctantly went along with their plans to avoid conflict. Each time I promised myself it would be the last. But family pressure is a powerful force, and breaking these patterns proved harder than I anticipated. My journey toward true independence began gradually. First, I started declining some of their requests. No, I could not drive Aunt Martha to her doctor appointment on Tuesday because I had an important meeting at work. No, I would not lend my car to my cousin for the weekend. Small boundaries, but each one felt like a major victory against decades of compliance. 3 months ago, I received a promotion at work that came with a substantial raise. This financial freedom allowed me to consider moving from my cramped 1-bedroom apartment to something nicer. After years of living in a building my parents had helped me find when I first moved out, I was ready for a place that was entirely my own choice. The decision to keep my new address private happened organically. As I toured apartments, I realized I was avoiding mentioning these visits during our weekly dinners. At first, I told myself it was because I did not want to jinx finding the perfect place. But deep down, I recognized this secrecy as another boundary I needed to establish. For once, I wanted to make a major life decision without input, suggestions, or criticism from my family. My new apartment is beautiful. Located in the northern part of the city, it offers everything my old place lacked. 2 bedrooms instead of 1. A spacious living room with large windows overlooking a small park, and a modern kitchen with stainless steel appliances. The building has a fitness center and a rooftop common area for residents. Most importantly, it is a 20-minute drive from my parents' house, instead of the previous 10 minutes, creating a literal as well as figurative distance between us. I spent weeks furnishing my new place, selecting each piece with care. A comfortable sectional sofa in a deep blue that I had always wanted, but my mother would have called impractical. Art for the walls that reflected my taste rather than family photos my parents insisted were necessary in every room. My home office in the 2nd bedroom was set up exactly how I wanted it, with a large desk facing the window rather than the wall. Something my father had always insisted was the only proper way to arrange a workspace. Living alone has always been important to me. I value my privacy and the freedom to arrange my day however I choose. After work, I enjoy unwinding without considering anyone else's schedule or preferences. Sometimes this means playing video games until midnight. Other times it means working on coding projects in perfect silence. The thought of sharing this carefully cultivated sanctuary with anyone, especially my sister, was inconceivable. Brianna, despite her age and education, has never really learned to be self-sufficient. She leaves dishes in the sink for days, expects others to clean up after her, and has no concept of personal space. During her college years, she went through multiple roommates who could not tolerate her habits. When she visits my parents, she treats their home like a hotel, expecting meals prepared and laundry done, without offering to help. The idea of her moving into my space, bringing chaos to my order, was something I would never voluntarily accept. As my secret moving process continued, I felt a growing sense of excitement about this act of independence. For the first time, I was creating a life entirely on my terms without family oversight or input. This apartment represented more than just a new living space. It symbolized a new chapter in asserting myself as an independent adult in my family's eyes. Finding the perfect apartment took nearly a month of dedicated searching. I spent evenings after work and weekend afternoons visiting different buildings across Seattle. Some were too small, others too expensive. Many were located in areas that would make my commute to work unbearable. I created spreadsheets comparing features, costs, and distances, approaching the search with the same methodical precision I apply to my software development projects. When I finally found the right place, I knew it immediately. Located in a quiet residential neighborhood with tree-lined streets, the building was only 5 years old and well-maintained. The leasing agent, a professional woman named Rachel, showed me 3 available units. The moment I walked into the third one, I felt at home. Corner unit, 7th floor, with windows on 2 sides, letting in abundant natural light. The kitchen featured granite countertops and enough cabinet space for all my cooking equipment. Both bedrooms were generously sized, and the master had a walk-in closet that would easily accommodate my wardrobe. Signing the lease felt monumental. I provided my employment information submitted to a credit check and put down a security deposit equal to 1 month's rent. All of this happened without a single family member knowing. No calls to my parents asking for advice on lease terms. No texts to my sister asking her opinion on the neighborhood. Just me making an adult decision independently. The moving process required careful planning. I scheduled the lease on my new apartment to begin 2 weeks before my old lease ended, giving me time to gradually transition between places without arousing suspicion. I took vacation days from work, telling my parents I was using the time to complete a certification course that would help my career. In reality, I spent those days moving boxes, arranging furniture deliveries, and setting up utilities at my new place. I hired a moving company for the larger furniture items, scheduling them during a weekday when neighbors from my old building were unlikely to notice and mention it to my parents, who occasionally bumped into them. For smaller items, I made dozens of trips in my car, packing it full each morning before work and each evening after returning. This gradual approach allowed me to avoid the obvious signs of a full-scale moving day that might have alerted family members who sometimes dropped by unannounced. Keeping the old apartment for an additional month served multiple purposes. First, it gave me time to thoroughly clean and repair any damage to ensure I received my security deposit back. Second, and more importantly, it provided a buffer period during which I could gradually tell my family about the move on my own terms, or continue using it as a decoy address if I decided to maintain my privacy longer. Throughout this secretive process, I experienced a growing sense of liberation. Each box unpacked in my new apartment represented another piece of my life that was fully under my control. Setting up my entertainment system without my father insisting on the correct way to arrange the speakers, organizing my kitchen without my mother rearranging items to match her system, placing furniture without Brianna claiming certain spaces as her own for when she visited. This was my space arranged according to my preferences alone. My new neighbors seemed friendly, but respectful of privacy. The couple across the hall, Daniel and Rebecca, invited me for coffee after seeing me move in. They had lived in the building for 3 years and offered helpful information about the neighborhood. The elderly woman next door, Mrs. Thompson, brought over homemade cookies and politely declined to come inside, sensing perhaps that I was still settling in. These interactions felt refreshingly adult and mutual, completely different from the parent-child dynamic that colored all my family relationships. As the new apartment began feeling like home, I found myself looking forward to returning there each evening. The commute to work was actually shorter from this location, and I discovered several good restaurants and coffee shops within walking distance. A small bookstore on the corner became a weekend haunt, and the park across the street provided a pleasant place for morning runs. I was building a life completely of my own design, and the satisfaction this brought was immeasurable. The decision not to immediately share my new address with family was conscious and deliberate. Initially, I told myself I would tell them after I was fully settled. Then I decided to wait until after I had hosted a housewarming gathering with friends from work. The excuses continued until I acknowledged the truth I was enjoying, having a space that was completely mine, unknown to my family. A sanctuary they could not invade with their opinions and expectations. As the weekly family dinner approached, I carefully prepared my appearance to avoid any signs of the move. I made sure to dress in clothes they had seen before, not new items I had purchased for the new apartment. I checked that my car did not contain any items that might suggest I was in transition between homes. I rehearsed casual responses to typical questions about my week, planning to focus on work accomplishments rather than personal matters. The drive to my parents' suburban home that Sunday afternoon gave me time to contemplate how and when I would eventually reveal my move. Perhaps next week, once I had returned the keys to my old apartment. Or maybe the following month after I had become fully comfortable in my new space. I had no definite timeline, only the certainty that I wanted the revelation to happen on my terms, not as a reaction to family pressure or expectations. As I pulled into the familiar driveway of my childhood home, I mentally prepared for the usual family dynamics. My mother's excessive attention, my father's probing questions about work, and Brianna's self-centered conversation. I reminded myself that I now had a private space to return to. Afterward, a thought that gave me strength to handle whatever the evening might bring. Little did I know that this particular family dinner would force my hand in ways I had not anticipated. The suburban house where I grew up sits on a quiet street lined with similar homes built in the late 80s. 2 stories of brick and siding with a meticulously maintained lawn that my father spends every Saturday morning perfecting. As I pulled into the concrete driveway, I noticed my father's car and my mother's SUV already parked in their usual spots. Brianna's small red compact was nowhere to be seen, which meant she was running late as usual. Dad was in the garage when I arrived, organizing his tool collection for what must have been the 100th time. He has a system for everything, with pegboards displaying wrenches and screwdrivers in ascending size order. This orderliness is something I inherited from him, though I apply it differently in my life. "Aaron, right on time as always," he said, putting down a hammer to greet me with a firm handshake. My father has never been one for hugs or emotional displays. "Your mother has been cooking all afternoon." The familiar scent of pot roast and garlic bread hit me as we entered through the garage door into the kitchen. Mom was stirring something on the stove, her graying hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing the apron I had given her for Christmas 3 years ago. "There's my boy," she exclaimed, rushing over to wrap me in the tight embrace that had been her trademark greeting since I was small. "Let me look at you. Are you eating enough? You seem thinner." This was our standard exchange, regardless of whether I had gained or lost weight since our last meeting. "I'm eating fine, Mom. Work has been busy, that's all." The kitchen looked exactly as it had for the past decade. White cabinets, granite countertops installed during their remodel 7 years ago, and family photos covering the refrigerator. Time seemed suspended here, with everything remaining in its proper place year after year. "Can I help with anything?" I offered, knowing the answer before it came. No, everything's under control. Go relax in the living room." Your father just turned on the pregame show." The living room, like the kitchen, remained unchanged. The same beige sofa and matching armchairs arranged around a coffee table. The large television mounted on the wall displayed football players warming up on a green field. Family photos lined the fireplace mantel, chronicling my and Brianna's growth from toddlers to college graduates. 20 minutes after my arrival, the front door opened without a knock. Brianna breezed in her attention, focused on her phone screen as she typed rapidly with her thumbs. "Sorry I'm late," she said without looking up. Traffic was insane. This was her standard excuse, though I suspected poor time management was the more likely culprit. When she finally pocketed her phone, she noticed me. "Oh, hey, Aaron. How's the boring job?" "Software development isn't boring to me," I replied evenly. This was another familiar exchange. Brianna had never understood my passion for coding, just as I failed to grasp her enthusiasm for social media marketing. Mom called us to the dining room where the oval table was set with the good china reserved for Sunday dinners and special occasions. Steam rose from serving dishes arranged in the center pot roast with carrots and potatoes, green beans with almonds, garlic bread, and a garden salad. The meal represented hours of preparation, a physical manifestation of my mother's love language. As we took our assigned seats, the same ones we had occupied for years, Dad at the head, Mom at the foot, Brianna and I on opposite sides, I felt a wave of nostalgia mixed with a strange sense of disconnection. This table, these people, this ritual, had shaped my life for 3 decades. Yet now, I had a secret space of my own, a separate life they knew nothing about. The contrast felt both liberating and slightly guilt-inducing. Conversation during the first part of the meal followed its usual pattern. Dad discussed neighborhood happenings and local politics. Mom shared updates about relatives and family friends. Brianna recounted dramatic stories from her workplace, each tale positioning her as either the hero or the victim. I contributed minimal information about my week, mentioning a challenging coding problem I had solved, but carefully avoiding any reference to my new apartment. Throughout the main course, I noticed my parents exchanging glances more frequently than usual. Mom would look at Dad with raised eyebrows, and he would give a small nod or shake of his head in response. This silent communication happened regularly in my family, often preceding announcements or discussions they had planned in advance. My senses went on high alert, wondering what topic they were preparing to introduce. As Mom began clearing the dinner plates in preparation for dessert, Dad cleared his throat in the distinctive way that always signaled he had something important to say. Years of family meetings had conditioned me to recognize this sound as the preamble to news that would impact everyone present. So he began folding his napkin with precision. We have something to discuss as a family. Mom returned from the kitchen with a cherry pie still warm from the oven, placing it in the center of the table before resuming her seat. The timing was deliberate, offering dessert as a sweetener to whatever news was coming. I felt my body tense involuntarily. Years of experience having taught me that family discussions often resulted in new obligations or expectations being placed on me. The table fell silent, as everyone sensed the shift in atmosphere. Brianna finally put her phone face down beside her plate, giving Dad her full attention. Mom smiled encouragingly at him, nodding slightly as if prompting him to continue. I maintained a neutral expression, waiting to discover what family matter required this formal announcement. It's about Brianna's living situation, Dad finally said, his tone carefully casual, despite the obvious preparation behind this moment. My sister perked up at the mention of her name, while I felt a subtle sense of relief that the topic did not seem to directly involve me. How wrong that assumption would prove to be. Dad took a sip of water, setting the stage for his announcement. Brianna got some unfortunate news yesterday, he began, glancing at my sister. Her landlord is selling the building to developers. All tenants have to vacate within 30 days. It's so unfair. Brianna interjected, instantly adopting the wounded tone she perfected during childhood. I just signed a 6-month lease renewal last month. They should have told us this was coming. Mom reached across the table to pat Brianna's hand sympathetically. These things happen, sweetie. But we've been thinking about solutions. The way she said we've been thinking immediately raised red flags in my mind. This phrase historically preceded my parents volunteering my time, resources, or space without consultation. Brianna needs a place to stay while she looks for a new apartment. Dad continued cutting into the pie and distributing slices onto dessert plates. The rental market is tough right now, and temporary accommodations are expensive. I nodded noncommittally, feeling a growing sense of unease about where this conversation was heading. I took a bite of pie to avoid having to respond immediately, buying time as I waited for the inevitable conclusion. So Mom jumped in, unable to contain her excitement about their solution. We thought it would be perfect if Brianna moved in with you for a while. The casual way she dropped this bombshell, as if announcing a minor change in dinner plans rather than a complete disruption of my living situation, was quintessentially my mother. Her tone conveyed absolute certainty that this arrangement would be not just acceptable but welcomed by me. Your apartment has that second bedroom you use as an office, Dad added pragmatically. Brianna could stay there until she finds a new place. 3 months maximum. I maintained a neutral expression while internally processing several reactions simultaneously. Surprise at their audacity, amusement at the irony of their planning, relief that I had already secured my new apartment, and curiosity about how this scenario would unfold if I remained silent. It would be so convenient, Mom continued enthusiastically. You two could carpool to save on gas, and Brianna wouldn't have to move all her things twice. Brianna, who had been examining her nails during this exchange, looked up with a half smile. It won't be that bad, Aaron. I'm pretty easy to live with. This statement, contrary to all evidence from her previous living situations, nearly made me laugh out loud. We could move her things next weekend, Dad said, already reaching for his phone to check his calendar. I can rent a truck on Saturday. We should be able to get everything in one trip if we start early. Your apartment is closer to my office anyway, Brianna added, warming to the idea now that she saw potential benefits for herself. And your neighborhood has those cute coffee shops I like. The discussion continued as if my agreement was a foregone conclusion. No one asked if I was willing to share my space. No one questioned whether this arrangement would disrupt my life. No one even paused to gauge my reaction. The assumption of compliance was so complete that they had bypassed the step of seeking my input entirely. The timing actually works out perfectly, Mom said, serving herself another small slice of pie. We can help Brianna pack this week, move everything on Saturday, and have her settled in by Sunday evening. Your sofa is more comfortable than mine anyway, Brianna remarked, scrolling through her phone again. And your television is bigger. This might actually be fun. Dad nodded approvingly. Family helps family. That's what we've always taught you kids. I remained silent, taking small bites of pie and observing this extraordinary scene unfold. My parents and sister continued planning the logistics of a move that would never happen, unaware that the apartment they were discussing was no longer mine. We'll need to figure out how to arrange the furniture, Mom mused. Maybe we can move your desk against the wall to make room for Brianna's dresser. And I'll need some closet space, Brianna added, looking up from her phone. Not much, just enough for my work clothes and a few other things. The hall closet could work for overflow, Dad suggested. Or maybe you could clear some space in your bedroom closet, Aaron. The conversation had taken on a surreal quality. Here was my family planning to rearrange an apartment they hadn't visited in months, unaware that it was no longer my residence. The temptation to reveal my secret grew stronger, but a perverse curiosity kept me silent. How far would they go in planning this imaginary living arrangement? Oh, and we should discuss the bathroom situation, Mom said, turning to me with a practical expression. You'll need to clear some cabinet space for Brianna's things. You know how many products she has. And we'll need a schedule for mornings, Brianna said, finally engaging fully in the conversation. I need at least 45 minutes in the bathroom to get ready for work. Aaron can adjust his routine, Dad stated confidently. He's always been flexible. This assumption about my flexibility, stated so matter-of-factly, exemplified exactly why I had needed to establish boundaries. My time, space, and preferences were consistently treated as negotiable, while other family members' needs were positioned as immovable priorities. And of course, you two will need to discuss splitting the utilities and groceries, Mom added, though I imagine those costs won't change much with 2 people instead of 1. I can contribute, Brianna said vaguely in a tone that suggested this contribution might be inconsistent at best. The most important thing is that Brianna has a safe place to stay during this transition. Dad concluded as if summarizing a business meeting. We knew we could count on you, Aaron. Throughout this extended planning session, I maintained my strategic silence, observing with a mixture of amazement and vindication. Every assumption they made, every decision they planned without consulting me, reinforced the wisdom of my choice to establish physical and emotional boundaries with my family. As they continued discussing the imaginary living arrangement in increasingly specific detail, I noticed my parents beginning to register my lack of participation. Mom glanced at me with a slightly confused expression. Dad's brow furrowed slightly as he realized I hadn't contributed to the planning. You're awfully quiet, Aaron, Mom finally said. Is everything okay? Just listening, I replied neutrally, taking another bite of pie. Do you have concerns about the arrangement? Dad asked, his tone suggesting that concerns would be acknowledged but ultimately dismissed. We haven't heard your thoughts, Mom added, though her expression suggested she expected only minor logistical questions rather than fundamental objections. I considered my options carefully. I could continue my silence, allowing them to proceed with plans that would inevitably collapse when they discovered the truth. Or I could reveal my secret now on my terms and establish a new dynamic in our family relationship. The moment of decision arrived when Mom, interpreting my silence as agreement, made her final request. "We'll need your spare key for Brianna. Do you have it with you, or should we get it next weekend when we help with the move?" Brianna will need her own key, of course. Mom continued, completely misinterpreting my silence as agreement rather than strategic observation. "Will your building manager need to approve adding her to the lease, or can she just stay as your guest?" Dad pulled out his phone and opened his calendar app. "I've blocked off next Saturday for the move. I figure we can start around 8 in the morning. I'll pick up the rental truck by 7:30, swing by to get you errand, then head to Brianna's place to load her things." Brianna, emboldened by what she perceived as my tacit acceptance, began listing her requirements. "I'll need Wi-Fi access right away, and space in the refrigerator for my meal prep containers. Oh, and fair warning, I have some early morning team calls sometimes, so you might hear me talking in the living room before you wake up." The detailed planning continued, growing more elaborate with each passing minute. Mom started making notes in the small notebook she always carried in her purse. "We should discuss a cleaning schedule," she suggested. "Maybe alternate weekends for deep cleaning the common areas. And what about laundry days? You'll need to coordinate so you're not both needing the washer at the same time. Aaron can do his laundry on weekdays, since he works from home sometimes." Brianna decided without asking if this was actually true or convenient for me. "I really only have time on weekends." Dad nodded approvingly at this solution. "That sounds reasonable. And for groceries, you two can either shop together or alternate weeks." "I prefer my own specific brands," Brianna interjected, "but I'm happy to pick up basics that we both use." The conversation shifted to furniture arrangements, with Dad sketching a rough floor plan of my old apartment on a napkin, despite not having visited in nearly a year. "If we move the desk here," he said, drawing on the napkin, "and shift the bookcase to this wall, there should be room for Brianna's dresser and the small nightstand she has now." Mom leaned over to examine his drawing. "That looks good, but what about her vanity table? She needs that for her makeup." "Maybe it could go in the living room," Dad suggested, "near the window for good natural light." They continued rearranging the furniture in an apartment that was no longer mine, planning the invasion of a space I no longer occupied. The irony was becoming almost too perfect to interrupt. "And of course, Aaron will need to clear out some bathroom storage," Mom added. "Brianna has quite a collection of products." "I can stack some things on top of the toilet if necessary," Brianna offered magnanimously, as if making a great concession. Throughout this detailed planning session, my parents occasionally glanced my way, clearly beginning to register my continued silence as unusual. I maintained a neutral expression, taking small bites of pie and sips of coffee, observing this extraordinary display of presumption. "You know," Dad said, turning to me directly, "you haven't said much about all this. Any concerns we should address?" This direct question created a brief opening, but I decided to remain vague, curious to see how much further they would go. "Just thinking about the logistics," I replied non-committally. This minimal response seemed to satisfy them temporarily, and they returned to planning with renewed vigor. "We should talk about parking," Dad continued. "Does your building have assigned spaces? Will Brianna need to get a permit for street parking? And what about guests?" Brianna added. "My friends sometimes stay over on weekends. That won't be a problem, right?" The questions and plans piled up one after another, creating an elaborate fantasy of a living arrangement that would never materialize. My parents discussed moving heavy furniture, rearranging my personal belongings, and establishing new household routines, all without once genuinely seeking my input or consent. As the planning grew more detailed, Mom began to notice my continued lack of enthusiasm. Her brow furrowed slightly as she studied my expression. "Aaron, you seem distracted. Is something wrong with the arrangement we're suggesting?" she asked, her tone indicating that she expected only minor concerns rather than outright refusal. Dad looked up from his napkin sketch, finally registering my silence as potentially meaningful. "If you have reservations, Now's the time to voice them, he said, though his tone suggested limited patience for any substantial objections. Brianna, less attuned to the shifting atmosphere, continued scrolling through her phone. I found some cute room divider screens online, she announced. Maybe we could get one for the office, so I have some privacy in there. The moment had arrived where my silence was becoming conspicuous enough that I could no longer maintain it without seeming deliberately obstructive. My family's attention focused on me waiting for a response to the elaborate plans they had constructed without my input. Actually, I began carefully, there's something I should tell you all about my living situation. This cryptic statement immediately captured everyone's attention. Mom put down her notebook. Dad set aside his napkin sketch, and even Brianna looked up from her phone. What do you mean? Mom asked, a note of concern entering her voice. Is there something wrong with your apartment? Did your rent go up again? Are you having trouble with neighbors? Dad suggested, or issues with the building management? Brianna frowned slightly. You didn't already get a roommate, did you? Because that would be really inconvenient timing. Their questions revealed the limited scope of possibilities they were willing to consider problems that might complicate their plans but not fundamentally prevent them. None imagined that I might have taken a major life step without their knowledge or input. The atmosphere in the dining room had shifted palpably. The casual certainty of their planning was replaced by confused anticipation. I realized that the moment had arrived to reveal my secret and establish a new foundation for our family relationship. I need to tell you something important, I said, setting down my fork deliberately. Something that affects these moving plans you've been making. I took a deep breath, looking at each family member in turn before speaking. I moved to a new apartment 3 weeks ago. The statement hung in the air for a moment, simple yet profound in its implications. 3 pairs of eyes stared at me with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. What do you mean you moved? Mom asked, her voice rising slightly. How could you move without telling us? Dad's brow furrowed deeply. 3 weeks ago, and you're just mentioning this now. Brianna's mouth opened and closed without words, perhaps the first time I had seen her truly speechless. I found a nicer place in a different neighborhood, I explained calmly. 2 bedrooms, better amenities, more space. I signed the lease last month and moved in gradually over the past few weeks. But why wouldn't you tell us about something so important? Mom asked, hurt evident in her voice. We could have helped you move, given you advice on the lease terms, checked out the neighborhood safety. That's exactly why I didn't tell you, I replied, keeping my tone gentle but firm. I wanted to make this decision completely on my own, without input or suggestions. Dad's expression hardened slightly. So you deliberately kept us in the dark. That seems unnecessarily secretive, Aaron. I wanted to experience making a major life decision independently, I explained. And honestly, after years of having my choices questioned or overruled, I needed to prove to myself I could do this without family involvement. Mom's eyes glistened with tears. We've only ever wanted to help you, to make your life easier and better. I know that's how you see it, I acknowledged. But from my perspective, it often feels like my preferences and boundaries aren't respected. Like right now, I continued gesturing to the napkin with Dad's furniture arrangement sketch. You've spent the last 30 minutes planning to move Brianna into my apartment without once genuinely asking if I was okay with the arrangement. We assumed you would want to help your sister, Dad said stiffly. Family helps family. That's how we raised you. Helping family doesn't mean I have no say in how that help happens, I countered. You didn't ask if I was willing to share my space or if the timing worked for me. You just decided and expected compliance. Brianna, recovering from her initial shock, turned to me with panic, replacing her earlier entitlement. But what am I supposed to do? Now I have to be out of my place in 30 days. Where am I going to go? I'm happy to help you look for a new apartment, I offered. I just went through the process, so I know which buildings have vacancies and which management companies are responsive. That's not the same as having a place to stay, she protested. I need somewhere to live while I search. Mom wiped her eyes with her napkin. I don't understand why you felt you needed to keep this a secret from us, Aaron. We're your family. Families share important life events. Because I knew exactly how this conversation would go, I replied. You would have questioned my choice of neighborhood, suggested different floor plans, insisted on meeting the building manager, and probably tried to negotiate lease terms on my behalf. Dad started to object, but I continued. Can you honestly tell me you would have simply supported my decision without trying to influence or change it? His silence was answer enough. I'm 32 years old, I said. I have a successful career, good credit, and the judgment to choose my own living situation. I needed to prove to myself and to all of you that I can make major decisions without family oversight. So you lied to us, Mom said, her hurt turning slightly toward anger. For weeks you sat at this table discussing other topics while hiding something this significant. I didn't lie, I corrected. I just didn't volunteer information I knew would invite interference. There's a difference. It feels like deception to me, Dad said firmly. And conveniently, your secret apartment leaves your sister without the safety net she needs right now. That's not fair, I responded. Brianna's housing situation is not my responsibility. She's an adult who can solve her own problems, just like I solved mine. Brianna's eyes filled with tears, a reaction I had seen countless times when she didn't get her way. I can't believe you're being so selfish. Where am I supposed to go? You have options, I said. You could find a short-term rental stay with friends or even move back home temporarily. I gestured around at our parents' house. There's plenty of space here. Mom and Dad exchanged uncomfortable glances at this suggestion. Well, we've actually converted your old bedroom into Dad's home office, Mom admitted. And mine is now a crafting room. We'd have to rearrange quite a bit to make space. The irony of this statement wasn't lost on me. So you've repurposed your own extra rooms but expected me to give up mine without hesitation. That's different, Dad insisted, though. His tone lacked conviction. We didn't know Brianna would need a place to stay when we converted those rooms. And I didn't buy a new apartment with an extra bedroom so Brianna could live there, I countered. I wanted a home office and occasional guest room for friends visiting from out of town. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Mom's eyes were red from suppressed tears. Dad's jaw was set in disapproval, and Brianna was alternating between looking wounded and texting frantically, presumably reaching out to friends about potential accommodations. I think I said carefully this situation highlights exactly why I needed to establish some independence. Every family decision seems to prioritize certain people's needs over others, and historically mine have been the ones deemed flexible or negotiable. That's not true, Mom protested weakly. Though her expression suggested she was beginning to recognize patterns she hadn't previously acknowledged. I love you all. I assured them. But I needed to create some boundaries. Having my own space that you don't have keys to, or detailed knowledge of, is part of that boundary. Dad pushed his chair back from the table abruptly. Well, I think we've had enough family discussion for one evening. Clearly, we need to come up with a new plan for Brianna's situation. I'm happy to help brainstorm solutions, I offered. I just can't be the solution. Mom began clearing dessert plates with more force than necessary, the clattering of dishes expressing the emotions she was struggling to verbalize. Brianna stood up and walked out of the dining room without another word, retreating to the living room, where I could hear her making a phone call in hushed, urgent tones. Dad turned to me with a look of profound disappointment. I hope this newfound independence brings you the happiness you seem to think it will, Aaron. But remember that independence cuts both ways. You can't expect family support only when it's convenient for you. The implied threat in his statement was clear, though I suspected it was born more from hurt than genuine intention to withdraw from our relationship. I don't want less family in my life, I clarified. I just want different terms for how we interact. More mutual respect, more consultation and recognition that I'm an adult with the right to make my own choices. Dad nodded stiffly but said nothing more. The dinner had clearly ended on a sour note, far removed from the usual warm goodbyes and leftovers packed for me to take home. As I gathered my jacket and prepared to leave, Mom approached me in the hallway. Will you at least give us your new address? She asked quietly. In case of emergencies. This small request represented a test of the new boundaries I was establishing. I'll text it to you tomorrow, I promised. but I'd appreciate calls before any visits. She nodded, her expression a complex mixture of hurt and grudging understanding. "Drive safely," she said, offering a brief hug that felt more restrained than her usual embraces. The drive back to my new apartment gave me time to process the confrontation. The evening had been difficult, even painful, but also necessary. As I turned the key in the lock of my new home, I felt both the weight of family tension and the lightness of newfound honesty. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but it would be authentic, and for now that seemed like progress worth the emotional cost. The week following our family dinner confrontation passed in uncomfortable silence. My phone remained unusually quiet, with none of the regular text messages from Mom asking about my day or calls from Dad with random questions about technology. Brianna's typically constant stream of memes and complaints disappeared entirely. The absence of communication spoke volumes about the impact of my revelation. Initially, this silence was a relief. My new apartment felt like a genuine sanctuary, free from family expectations or obligations. I enjoyed quiet evenings arranging my remaining unpacked items and exploring my new neighborhood without interruption. Yet as days passed, a familiar sense of guilt began to creep in. Had I been too harsh, too selfish? The deeply ingrained family loyalty I had been raised with questioned my newfound independence. On Thursday evening, I decided to break the silence. I sent a group text to my parents with my new address and a brief invitation to visit sometime after they had processed their feelings about our discussion. I included photos of my new place, an olive branch extending virtual access before physical entry. To Brianna, I sent a separate message offering to help review apartment listings or provide references if needed. Mom responded first with a simple, "Thank you for sharing. Your new place looks lovely." The brevity was uncharacteristic but represented an attempt at connection. Dad replied hours later with, "Apartment looks nice. Good lighting for your plants." His observation about my houseplants, a hobby he had always supported, suggested a willingness to move forward. Brianna didn't respond that day, her silence continuing as a form of passive resistance. By the weekend, I decided more direct communication was necessary. I suggested meeting my parents at a coffee shop halfway between our homes' neutral territory, where we could talk without the emotional weight of either household influencing the conversation. They agreed, and on Sunday morning I found them already seated at a corner table when I arrived. "The new neighborhood seems nice," Dad commented. As I sat down, his tone cautiously approving. I looked it up online. Good safety ratings. "The building has excellent security," I confirmed, accepting this practical observation as his way of extending an olive branch. "And the commute to work is actually shorter." Mom studied me over her coffee cup. "You look well. The move must not have been too stressful." "Planning it carefully helped," I replied, though I would have appreciated help with some of the heavier furniture. This admission seemed to soften something in her expression. "You know, we would have been there in a heartbeat if you'd asked." I know, I acknowledged, but I needed to do this independently, even if it meant doing it the hard way. Dad cleared his throat. "We've been thinking about what you said at dinner, about boundaries and consultation. Your father and I may have been presumptuous at times." Mom added, the admission clearly difficult for her. "We're used to being needed, to having our advice sought out. It's hard to adjust when that changes." "I still value your advice," I assured them. "I just need it to be offered when requested, not imposed as the only acceptable option." Dad nodded slowly. "That seems reasonable. Though old habits die hard, so you may need to remind us, occasionally." This conversation represented a small but significant shift in our family dynamic. No dramatic apologies or emotional breakthroughs, just a quiet acknowledgement that relationships needed to evolve as children became independent adults. For my parents raised in families where parental authority remained unquestioned throughout adulthood, this was considerable progress. "What about Brianna?" I asked, addressing the elephant in the room. "Has she found a place to stay?" Mom sighed. "She's staying with her friend Jennifer for now. It's not ideal they have a studio apartment, but it's temporary. I offered to help her search for a new place, I reminded them. That offer still stands. She's still upset, Dad admitted. Feels like you abandoned her in a crisis. I didn't create her housing crisis, I pointed out. And I'm offering help that respects both her needs and my boundaries. Sometimes the help people want isn't the help they need, Mom reflected. Brianna has always relied heavily on others. Maybe this situation will encourage more self-sufficiency. This insight from my mother surprised me. Perhaps our confrontation had prompted reflections beyond just my relationship with them. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, and by the time we parted, the tension had noticeably decreased. We made plans for them to visit my new apartment the following weekend, with the explicit understanding that it would be a visit without criticism or suggestions for changes. A small step, but meaningful in its acknowledgement of my autonomy. Brianna eventually responded to my text 3 days later. Her message was brief. Found some places to look at. Could use a second opinion, if you're serious about helping. This reluctant acceptance of my offered assistance rather than demanded housing represented progress in our sibling dynamic. We met at the first apartment on her list the following afternoon. The building was similar to my old one, with reasonable rent for the area. As we toured the one-bedroom unit, I offered practical observations about water pressure and appliance conditions rather than judgments or decisions. It's smaller than I was hoping for, she commented as we left. But within your budget, I reminded her. And in a safe neighborhood, close to your work. She nodded reluctantly. I guess I need to be realistic about what I can afford on my own. Being financially independent means making these kinds of practical decisions, I agreed. But it also means the space is entirely yours, arranged how you want it, without compromising with anyone else's preferences. This perspective seemed to resonate with her. I've never actually lived completely alone before, she realized. Always had roommates, or lived at home. It has its advantages, I assured her. Complete control over your environment is surprisingly satisfying. We viewed 2 more apartments that afternoon, and by the end of the week she had submitted an application for the second one we saw. It was a studio with a separate sleeping alcove, small but well-designed in a building with good amenities. Most importantly, it was within her budget without requiring financial support from our parents or roommates to share costs. As weeks passed, our family found a new equilibrium. Sunday dinners resumed, though, with a different tone. My parents made visible efforts to ask, rather than tell, to suggest, rather than direct. They expressed interest in my new apartment without criticism, even finding aspects to genuinely compliment. When they occasionally slipped into old patterns of assumption or controlled gentle reminders, usually redirected the conversation. Brianna moved into her studio apartment with minimal drama. Mom and Dad helped with the physical moving while I assisted with setting up her Wi-Fi network and mounting her television. She discovered, perhaps for the first time, the satisfaction of creating a space that reflected her preferences alone. Our relationship improved as the perceived betrayal of not housing her faded, replaced by a more adult sibling dynamic, based on mutual respect rather than obligation. My new apartment became everything I had hoped for, a sanctuary, a expression of independence, and eventually a place where family was welcome on terms that respected boundaries. I hosted my first family dinner there, 2 months after our confrontation. Enjoying the role of host rather than child serving a meal, in a space that was unquestionably mine. The experience taught me that true independence sometimes requires difficult conversations and temporary discomfort. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's an essential part of developing healthy adult relationships. The initial hurt feelings and tension were the growing pains necessary for our family to evolve beyond outdated dynamics. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that love and boundaries can coexist. My parents still call too often, and occasionally slip into giving unsolicited advice. Brianna still expects more than she should sometimes. But the fundamental acknowledgement that I am an adult with the right to make my own decisions, even when those decisions disappoint others, has transformed our relationships for the better. As I reflect on this journey toward authentic independence, I wonder how many of you have faced similar struggles with family boundaries. Have you ever had to stand firm on a decision that disappointed people you love? How did you balance family loyalty with personal autonomy? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life lessons about family relationships and finding your own path. If you know someone who might benefit from hearing this story, consider sharing it with them. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to establish healthy boundaries.